a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's show, an exclusive report from Syria with the Islamic State group's caliphate collapsing in the war-torn country. Thousands are fleeing the threat of violence and hunger, among them foreign jihadists. Emmanuel Macron presses Egypt on human rights during a first visit to the country. This after coming under pressure from rights groups to raise the matter with Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Also coming up, another episode of Flavors of Iraq, an animation series by Iraqi-French filmmaker Furat Alani. This week he takes a look at Baghdad under US sanctions. Thank you for watching. We start with Syria, where Islamic State group militants have been boxed into a small territory in the east of the country. As the battle between the fighters and the Syrian Democratic Forces draws to an end, France 24's James Andre, Maïssa Awad and Roméo Langlois go to the front line to meet with those fleeing the area, among them Mathilde, a French jihadist. She left for Syria 4 years ago and is now facing a 10-year prison sentence back in France.
Civilians continue to pour out of the Islamic State's collapsing caliphate. They are fleeing the fighting, the bombing, and the hunger. Amongst these women, a number of jihadi brides who travelled from all over the world to live under the Sharia.
Turkey. Kazakhstan. أنا ليس كثير أنتم روسي عارف أنا ليس كثير عارف عربي أنتم روسي عارف.
This woman is French. She says her name is Mathilde, that she has no children, and that she lived in the French city of Tours before traveling to Syria 4 years ago. In all, we could speak to her for 15 minutes. What do you hope's going to happen now?
Rentre en France.
Are you sad that it's over?
Non, pardon. Non. Ça fait longtemps que j'essaie de partir d'ici, mais sans argent, sans connaissance, c'est pas possible.
Mathilde says there is still a number of French nationals inside what's left of the so-called caliphate.
Je sais qu'il y en a parce que quand on marche, tout ça, j'entends les Français parler, mais je sais absolument pas combien. Je sais pas. C'est des gens qui veulent pas aller en prison, donc c'est soit vous partez et vous êtes à peu près sûr de finir en prison, soit vous restez et vous êtes à peu près sûr de mourir. Donc il y en a qui ont fait le choix. Moi, j'ai fait le choix d'aller en prison, il y en a qui ont fait le choix de mourir.
Mathilde says she was disappointed with her life in the caliphate, but never explicitly condemns ISIS crimes or ideology.
En France, j'étais pas libre parce que j'étais musulmane et je pouvais pas pratiquer comme je voulais. Dans l'État islamique, on peut pratiquer, mais il faut pratiquer comme eux. Vous voyez ce que je veux dire? Et si j'avais su, je serais jamais venue ici. Je savais pas que c'était comme ça. Et je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de personnes qui savaient pas que c'était comme ça. Je dis pas que c'est horrible, on m'a rien fait là-bas. On m'a pas touché, on m'a pas torturé, on m'a pas frappé. On me traite très bien. Mais c'est pas ce que j'imagine.
But when you came, there were already the videos. The executions, the terrorist attacks.
Non, je suis bien avant. Je suis avant les attentats.
Do you regret coming here? How do you feel about all this today?
Fatiguée. Très fatiguée.
Mathilde explains her first husband persuaded her to go to Syria, but stayed in France.
Il n'est jamais venu ici, mais c'est lui qui m'a envoyé ici. Du coup, ils m'ont jugé en même temps. Sans que je sois sur le territoire français, ils m'ont jugé. Moi, je suis déjà jugée et condamnée.
Who is your husband?
Désolée, je ne peux pas le dire dans la caméra.
What were you sentenced to in France? Do you know?
Ils m'ont condamné à 10 ans de prison, dont 2 tiers de sursis.
What were you sentenced for?
Pour terrorisme, je suppose.
The French government is in no hurry to repatriate jihadists. Mathilde knows it. She says she wants to serve her time in France.
Nous, en tant que femmes, on fait... Je suis désolée, là-bas, par faire à manger, le ménage, la cuisine, vous voyez, nous, on va pas au combat, on fait... Physiquement, on fait rien, vous voyez ce que je veux dire? Après, ça va être des idées, des pensées que le gouvernement va pas aimer. Mais nous, celles qui veulent retourner en France, c'est pas pour commettre des attentats, c'est pas pour aller tuer je sais pas qui dans un supermarché. Nous, si on veut rentrer, c'est pour essayer de retrouver une vie normale.
The Kurdish Authority is overwhelmed by this continuous influx of foreign jihadists. In France, jihadi brides are considered a security threat, and politicians fear public backlash over their return. To the Kurds, these women and their children are both a problem and a major bargaining chip on the international scene.
Over to Egypt and a meeting between Emmanuel Macron and his Egyptian counterpart Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Monday. The two leaders have been overseeing the signing of tens of deals between Paris and Cairo worth close to €1 billion. According to observers, however, the visit was overshadowed by Egypt's human rights abuses. Here's a report from our correspondents in Cairo.
An editorial meeting in the offices of Madamas, the last independent outlet in Egypt. Reporters Without Borders has rated it among the 20 most dangerous countries in the world for journalists.
Our website was blocked a year ago, in 2017. This is a very difficult time. It's even worse than the period before the revolution, when there were already many limitations for journalists.
500 websites are blocked in Egypt, and at least 38 journalists are currently imprisoned due to their work. As a result of this repression, few Egyptians dare to risk showing their faces on camera. Very rarely, some refuse to give in to this fear. Such is the case with independent publisher Mohammed Hesham.
There are many different types of censorship, especially a kind of social censorship, where lawyers do nothing else but hunt down authors or encourage their surveillance.
Because of this clip, the belly dancer shown here was given 6 months in prison for inciting debauchery. As for this puppet from a television show, she provoked the anger of a lawyer who judged her language to be incompatible with Egyptian values and took the case to court. We met with the lawyer. Samir Sabri has already tried 2,710 cases for immorality. For him, informing on others is his duty as a citizen, encouraged by the government.
Right now, the authorities' policy is geared towards purifying society of all immoral acts, violations, corruption, all these kinds of things.
Sabri was the lawyer who convicted this man for blasphemy. Before selling fish, Mohammed Abdullah Nasser was a regular figure on television, but his criticism of religion swiftly brought him a stay in prison, where he spent just under a year. Now free, his perspective is an unusual one.
The only moment where I could truly speak freely and say all that I wanted was when I was in prison. I could have gone mad, but I chose to accept the verdict. And prison became a space of freedom for me.
It's unclear if the 60,000 political prisoners or prisoners of conscience arrested under the regime of President Sisi also see Egyptian jails as places of freedom.
Turning our attention to the United Arab Emirates, where an awards ceremony to promote gender equality has drawn mockery on social media. Why? Well, because all of the winners were men. At least that's what resonated online. In reality, just one of the 4 awards was for an individual and the other 3 were for government agencies. The categories included Best Personality supporting gender balance, Best Federal Authority supporting gender balance, and the Best Gender Balance Initiative. And it was Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the ruler of Dubai, who handed out the medals and certificates on Sunday. We end this week's show with another episode of Flavors of Iraq, a series of animations authored by French-Iraqi journalist Furat Alani. In Reeboks in Baghdad, he takes a look at multilateral sanctions imposed on the country back in the 90s.
Rare consensus last night in New York at the UN Security Council. A commercial, financial and military embargo has been voted against Iraq until, quote, the full withdrawal of Iraqi troops from Kuwait and the restoration of Kuwait's legitimate government.
In 1992, I spent the whole summer in Iraq with my mother and my sister. The war with Kuwait had ended over a year and a half ago, but the embargo was still standing. While I was busy growing up, the country was collapsing. Aiming to neutralize Saddam and stop him from rearming, the UN targeted the regime with sanctions. But as a result, the entire nation found itself cut off from the world. There were no more direct flights to Baghdad. You had to land in Jordan and travel to Iraq by car. I walked the streets of Baghdad with my cousin Ziad. Ziad has green eyes. Every time we came across his neighbors, he proudly told them that I come from Paris. Children came up to us. They smiled at me and asked me questions about France. But soon, everyone's attention focused elsewhere. More and more people gathered round. Even older kids like Ziad's friends wanted to take a look at my Reebok pump trainers. I grew increasingly uncomfortable. My car for your shoes. I didn't understand, I was only 12. He insisted, I turned him down. He insisted further. Everyone crowded around me. I didn't know what to do. In France, we were by no means rich, but we did just fine. I started to think my father sent us here to make me aware of how lucky I was. A pair of trainers brought home to me the injustice of the embargo.
Well, that's it for us this week. Thank you for watching Middle East Matters.
From North America to the southern tip of Patagonia, join us for a look at the latest political, economic, cultural and social news from the Americas.
Inside the Americas, presented by Jeannie Godula on France 24 and France24.com.